Section 7 of Abraham Lincoln, the Practical Mystic by Francis Grierson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. President by the Grace of God. Lincoln lived long enough to become convinced that everything exists for a purpose. He saw that the rebellion had to be, and that in the seeming confusion of sentiments and interests, the divine ruled over all persons and parties. Events had to follow as ordained by the spiritual power that lies behind appearance. Lincoln worked in the light. Tsar Nicholas of Russia lived in the dark. He could not tell why he occupied the Russian throne. Lincoln knew why he occupied the White House. The Kaiser was not able to see why will, energy, and money should not rule the world. Never were the lessons taught by Lincoln's career so much needed as now, when a ruthless autocracy is seeking to get rid of all moral responsibility, while on the other hand thousands are awakening to the necessity of a new order, of fostering the mystical renaissance. Science and the mystical. Quintilian said, "No man can become a perfect orator without a knowledge of geometry." It is not without reason that the greatest men have bestowed extreme attention on this science. Locke, the philosopher, gives the reason. Geometry develops the habit of pursuing long trains of ideas, which will remain with the student who will be enabled to pierce through the mazes of sophism and discover the latent truth, when persons who have not this habit will never find it. Lincoln was passionately fond of geometry. His oratory was based on logic, but his logic came from the mystical absolute, a geometric science of the soul which he alone could appropriate through his perception of fundamental principles of universal law. He could perceive that an idea is a personal conception of a mathematical truth, as distinguished from mere beliefs, notions, and sentiments. Others turn politics into the art of influencing crowds through their sentimental opinions. Lincoln engaged in trying to make them think logically. While others gave vague reasons for their political views, he gave reasons based on law, which he explained with simple force and lucid phraseology. He never attempted to tell all he knew. The practical mystic never does. He knew how he acquired his knowledge, but his reticence was as pronounced as his gift of expression. It was this quality of reticence that kept him from taking counsel from all sorts of statesmen and explaining the inexplicable. There was not a man among them that could have understood. In this, Lincoln was a mystic fully fledged, initiated, as by centuries of experience. His innate wisdom taught him exactly how much the people could understand, how much politicians could digest, and how much statesmen could divine. Not only did he hold the allegiance of the Whigs, but he gained the allegiance of the abolitionists. This indeed was intellect the old and the new. How old, yet new, are nature's moods and manifestations. How mysteriously the souvenirs of the past are revived and quickened in new forms, faces, and phenomena. The seasons come and go with varying moods and seem new, but they are older than the formulas of civilization. Strangers bring with them new influences, but we discover in them something familiar from the vague and shadowy past. Every single thing is related to every other thing, and illuminated minds are the periods that separate the cycles, but not the laws of human progress. The form is new, the principle remains unchangeable. Solomon was unique in his glory, but Athens had Pericles, Rome a Caesar, Europe a Bonaparte, and the New World a Lincoln. Real genius is elemental. It influences humanity as much as heat and cold, rain and sunshine. People who offer the greatest opposition to it are those who fall before its onward march. Indeed, it seems to be, from all historical accounts, a sort of car of juggernaut to those who wilfully oppose it. And this is not surprising, since it is the greatest power of which man has any personal knowledge, supported by all the forces of the material and the spiritual. Destiny versus will. Great men float into power on mystical waves moved by the force of destiny. The greater the mind, the greater the fixture of force behind it. Between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, presidents came and went as figureheads of parties or props to some ephemeral political scaffold. The majority were stopgaps. They, like the majority of politicians and many others, put their trust in will and desire. They could not understand that a man is not great because of his will, but because of his innate knowledge. Washington realized his destiny and understood. Lincoln realized what he was and what he would become long before his nomination for the presidency, but he was wholly unconscious of any will to power. The born statesman is aware of his invincible, hidden knowledge, and he places will in the second rank. He knows it counts for nothing in the fundamental issues. Lincoln discerned at an early age the difference between desire and destiny. He saw the dangerous illusions under which the will-to-power politicians and others labored, and how vain were their hopes. Will and ambition are characteristics of men who mistake the material for the permanent. Bonaparte and Bismarck exercised their will for the possession of the material, and both failed. The Hohenzollerns and their henchmen have failed in the same exercise. This exercise is indulged in by people who believe that to become intensely individualistic means the development of powerful personality. They talk of their rights as if their desires gave them the privilege of robbing their neighbors. And what some are doing publicly, others are doing privately. The motives for this desire for material domination vary with the individual. With one it is to get even with a group, with another it is to get even with a party. With others it is to appear in public, to be frequently named and sometimes applauded. Compromise and subterfuge are ingredients inseparable from the illusion of the will. While Lincoln often assisted his friends, he refused to hedge or trim in order to please. Destiny behind him was invulnerable, his own sense of justice inexorable. While others were working for the good of their city, state, or section, he was thinking of the good of the whole country, with all humanity behind it. Destiny created the man and the crisis at the same time, as always happens. The one could not exist without the other. Destiny is the collective conscience acting through elective genius. For this reason, Lincoln was not only the man of his time, but the man whose example will exert the greatest influence on future eras. James Jacques, practical mystic. In the hubbub and confusion created by the upheaval which began in 1914, it is of vital importance for thinking people of the English-speaking countries to know what went on in the inner circles at Washington during that year of trial, 1864, when the destiny of the Union seemed to be hanging in the balance. It is time to know the truth about Lincoln's supernaturalism. Your favorite historian avoids the subject. He will not touch on a matter so dangerous to his neutral agnosticism. He avoids the details of the supernatural events of that wonderful time. He will discuss anything but that. He knows that once thinking people become acquainted with the facts, they will begin to form their own conclusions. In Lincoln's day, agnosticism had not taken root in the intellectual soil of this country. The negative writings of Darwin and Spencer were unknown among politicians and statesmen, and the churches still believed that spirit ruled matter and that Providence was directing the affairs of the nation. In Lincoln's time, agnostic ministers were unknown. All believed in a positive religion. The Union was saved from disruption because Lincoln and his aides were firm believers in a higher power and a higher destiny. Doubt, cynicism, and skepticism would have handed the country over to universal chaos. The downfall of the Union would have meant the end of the British Empire, and today Kaiserism would be in supreme command of the remnant of Anglo-Saxon civilization. It is the fashion to read romantic novels, but the story of Jacques' peace mission is more fascinating than any novel, because it is fact instead of fiction, and because its basic element is the supernatural. James Jacques was himself a practical mystic of no uncertain power, but whose great gifts were overshadowed by the personality of Lincoln, his revered chief. Before the Civil War, Jacques was a mathematician, a Greek and Latin scholar, a college president, and one of the most forcible Methodist preachers of the age. His field of work was the country around Springfield, where Lincoln often heard him preach. Long before Jacques received the mystical command to undertake his peace mission to the rebel headquarters at Richmond, Lincoln knew and respected him as a sincere and earnest patriot. Jacques was colonel of an Illinois regiment during the war, and had already taken a valiant part in some of the most terrible battles. Colonel Jacques was inspired to act as he did without at first consulting anyone. He conceived the idea of going to Richmond, interviewing the Confederate leaders, and so gaining some definite information that would eventually lead to peace through victory for the Union. His mission was a secret known only to a limited circle, including the President, General Rosecrans, General Garfield, who later became President, and James R. Gilmore, the friend of Lincoln. Mr. Gilmore, in his Personal Recollections of Lincoln, devotes many pages to this peace mission, with all the details from its inception by Colonel Jacques to its final wonderful results. General Garfield, writing to Mr. Gilmore from his military headquarters on June 17, 1863, said, "Colonel Jacques has gone on his peace mission. The President approved it, though of course he did not make it an official matter. There are some very curious facts relating to his mission, which I hope to tell you some day. It will be sufficient for me to say that enough of the mysterious is in it to give me an almost superstitious feeling of faith, and certainly a great interest in his work. He is most solemnly in earnest, and has great confidence in his mission." Colonel Jacques succeeded in gaining a respectful hearing before the highest authorities at Richmond without being shot as a spy, more than one of his friends having predicted such a fate for him. He returned to the North determined to wait patiently for another opportunity to try again. In 1864, after conferring with Mr. Gilmore and the President, it was decided that a second mission should be set on foot, this time in company with his friend Gilmore, whom a special providence had chosen to record all the incidents and events of that unprecedented undertaking. On this occasion, Colonel Jacques learned all that he had hoped to learn, and more, from the lips of Jefferson Davis, President of the Southern Confederacy, and when Jacques and Gilmore returned, Lincoln requested Mr. Gilmore to prepare a detailed account of the astounding revelation for the Atlantic Monthly. This vital recital of the facts was published, and it created a sensation from one end of the country to the other. It turned the tide in favor of Lincoln's election for a second term and saved the Union. This, in brief, was the work of Jacques the Mystic, whose name today is only known to the more serious students of Lincoln's life and work. Had the President been less a practical mystic than he was, he would have forbidden Colonel Jacques to undertake a journey full of risks and peril, and one that ordinary businessmen would have called an insane adventure. Images and Dreams. Noah Brooks, in his Life of Lincoln, gives the following account of a vision which the President described to him. "It was just after my nomination in 1860 when the news was coming thick and fast all day, and there had been a great hurrah, boys, so that I was well tired out and went home to rest and threw myself on a lounge in my chamber. Opposite where I lay was a bureau with a swinging glass, and looking in the glass I saw myself reflected, nearly at full length, but my face, I noticed, had two separate and distinct images, the tip of the nose of one being about 3 inches from the tip of the other. I was a little bothered, perhaps startled, and got up and looked in the glass, but the illusion vanished. On lying down again, I saw a second time, plainer, if possible, than before. Then I noticed that one of the faces was a little paler, say 5 shades, than the other. I got up, and the thing melted away. I left, and in the excitement of the hour forgot all about it, nearly, but not quite, for the thing would once in a while come up and give me a little pang, as though something uncomfortable had happened. Later in the day I told my wife about it, and a few days later I tried the experiment again, when, sure enough, the thing came again. My wife thought that it was a sign that I was to be elected to a second term of office, and that the paleness of one of the faces was an omen that I should not live through the last term. Not long after his second inauguration, he said to a friend in Washington, "I have seen this evening what I saw on the evening of my nomination. As I stood before a mirror, I saw 2 images of myself, a bright one in front and one that was pallid standing behind. It completely unnerved me. The bright one I know is my past, the pale one my coming life. I do not think I shall live to see the end of my second term." In his biography, Morgan relates a dream which Lincoln had. He thought he was in a vast assembly, and the people drew back to let him pass. Just then Lincoln heard someone say, "He is a common-looking fellow." Lincoln in his dream turned to the man and said, "Friend, the Lord prefers common-looking people. That is the reason he makes so many of them." Shortly before Lincoln's assassination, some friends were talking about certain dreams recorded in the Bible when the president said, "About 2 days ago I retired very late. I could not have been long in bed when I fell into a slumber, for I was weary. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. It was light in all the rooms. Every object was familiar to me, but where were all the people who were grieving as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find the cause of a state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the East Room, which I entered. Before me was a catafalque on which was a form, wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards. There was a throng of people, some gazing mournfully upon the catafalque, others weeping pitifully. "Who is dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The President," was the answer. "He was killed by an assassin." Then came a loud burst of grief from the crowd, which woke me from my dream. The New Era. The principles enunciated by Abraham Lincoln are abiding examples not only for the English-speaking peoples, but for the whole world. Out of what seems universal confusion tending towards chaos, there arises a new era. A material transformation had to occur before the uprising of the spiritual, and the truth is beginning to dawn in the minds of thousands that behind all material phenomena there dwells the divine idea. Before the gates of oblivion closed on civilization, we were plucked from the gulf in accordance with the divine purpose. Amidst the strife of contending factions, the thunder of upheaval reverberates from continent to continent, heralding the close of a dispensation that has known the trials and triumphs of nearly 2,000 years, from which is emerging the mystical dawn of a new day. End of section 7. End of Abraham Lincoln, the Practical Mystic by Francis Grierson.